Welcome back to Second Breakfast. We're doing something a little bit different today. I'm here with Cam and Tristan because, if you didn't know, Cam wrote a book. That's right, it's an audio drama and novel, Tarts in Space. It is a silly science fiction dark comedy, or as Cam likes to call it, science fiction cancer comedy, whatever you want to call it. The book is coming out, and we wanted to do some promotional material for it here on the show. So
we're not here to talk about House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 9?
No, but what if we were? That's the dream. It's the dream, isn't it? No, we'll just that episode, the episode that never was, will forever live in my head.
I'll have to talk to my agent about this.
No, but I'm very excited because I'm going to be interviewing Cam and Tristan, who are, of course, our lead actors for the lead characters of this production. Cam played Frank Mustard, and Tristan played Captain Duncan Arugula. So I'm going to be asking these two a series of questions, and I'm really excited to talk about the book with both of you. If you didn't know, this is part 2 of our interview series. We did a part 1 already where Cam talked about the writing process of this book, and we are also going to do a part 3 where Cam will talk about the post-production and editing process. But today's focus is going to be on the recording and production, which is why we have Tristan here with us, of course. First question, I'm going to point to Cam. Cam, how early in the process did you have Tristan in mind for this project? And was it always about the character Duncan, or did you consider him for other roles in this book?
Ooh, you'll have to repeat the second part later because I'm sure I'll go too long on the first part.
I've got it here, don't worry.
This started as just a one-off. I was clearing the pipes after a really stressful horror drama that I did. And the day after I finished and turned that one over, I wrote the first chapter of Tarts, which at the time was the entire story. It was just going to be a little short story. And I actually recorded that as a demo at the time. So I recorded Duncan and I recorded the narration. And I was doing a voice that was sort of a Tristan pastiche. Mm-hmm. I think having had the wonderful privilege of working with him so many times, I know how to write to his voice and to his strengths. And it's not that I know everything he's going to do with a text, because every time I've ever written something for him, he does more with it than is on the page. He makes it funnier. He makes it more interesting. I think he makes it deeper than whatever I'm trying to go for on the page. But this character was definitely started as a Tristan sketch. I mean, I literally sketched out some character designs, and it looks like Tristan with an astronaut helmet on. It's very
I remember when you first did that, it was a long time before you actually had the finished product out. You had sketched it and you sent it to me. And I, looking back, that's been so long ago, and finally actually recording the character was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was 3 years later, 3 years after I did that little one-off short story, that I was deciding which project to jump back into with Tristan being on board to record. And that one just jumped out at me because I think we'd had a conversation, and Tristan, you talked about wanting to play a hero. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've talked about this sort of archetype a lot on the show, but I don't think classic heroes really exist anymore. And I don't know if I could write a straight kind of down the middle Arthurian hero, but this was my way of doing that. And it was to give you this kind of big, goofy, weird, insecure character who I think becomes a hero by the end of the story, but it's not a linear journey. So yeah, absolutely. I wrote it for him. I think this is about us as much as it's about 100 other things. What was the other part of the question?
I was wondering if you had considered him for other roles in the book, or like once you knew Tristan, you wanted him to be part of it, you were like, it's going to be Duncan?
Well, I think that's part of the fun. This was the first comedy I'd written in a couple years. I did a couple years making comics and graphic novels after working on horror and drama. So I started with comedy and then very much just went off into the wilderness. So coming back here, I wanted to do something that felt fresh. And I think the very obvious thing would have been to make Tristan Frank and me Duncan, because that is where our voices and I think where our senses of humor would naturally go.
Well, and to give the listeners some idea of what you mean by that is normally in a lot of the stuff that we've recorded before, because we've been doing stuff like this in one way or another, and different shapes and different forms for years. But usually the characters that I do tend to be a little gruffer, and the characters that Cam tends to do are a little higher in register. So obviously, with Frank and Duncan, Frank being the lower register, that's just what I was more inclined to do, or my experience in the different characters that I'd done previously were closer to. And so one of the big things that he felt, you told me this, you said you felt like you were going out on a limb by doing the gruff character yourself and tossing the higher register character over to me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think I'm usually the kind of strangled neurotic, and you're kind of the gruff, resentful straight man who can be kind of disapproving and sardonic. And flipping that felt like a really interesting challenge. I don't know. It was more exciting and dangerous for me. I got more out of it.
No, I love that. One of my questions I wanted to ask for both of you was about your preparation. Tristan, I'll start with you. How did you prepare for the role of Duncan? And how was the process? What was this process like compared to how you've prepared for other roles with other projects you've done with Cam?
Well, so in talking about what we were just talking about, the difference in register being a little higher, from the jump, the main thing that sets this character's voice and personality apart from most of the others is that I was kind of able to hide behind the gruffness and bravado of previous characters a little easier, because when you're putting on that voice and that affect, it's really easy to slip into something different from yourself, right? And I have degrees of the sardonic humor and the way that I like to joke normally, but it's different when you get to sort of put someone else's entire personality and voice on. This register was so much closer to my normal voice that it really feels more like acting versus losing myself in a character and a voice that I'm putting on. Because this was much closer to me, it was a little more challenging on my end to create a voice that was distinct from my own, but was unique enough to where you could say, oh, this is that character, and also still be able to punch in all of the different emotional directions and comedic directions that I was going to need to, because when you have a gruff voice, the way that you play comedy is a little bit different, and the inflection points are different than when you've got this high voice that's also supposed to be sort of carrying the main story thread for the entire the book. So it was definitely, I think there was more weight on not blowing your load in terms of the performance and hitting highs so often. It was sort of finding a more measured way of acting out these scenes, because previously a lot of the stuff that we were doing was shorter form, so you could be a little bit more over the top and it didn't feel too tiresome. But here, you needed to I felt the need to ground myself a little bit more and not be at level 11 for the entire performance.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And Cam, I'm sure that preparing for the role of Frank was probably really different than other roles you've prepared for in the past, because like y'all are highlighting this distinction and this flipping of the expectation of what you normally do. So can you talk us through what it was like when you were preparing for Frank, especially because you weren't just preparing for an acting role, you also wrote Frank. So I'm curious, like, when were you wearing the writing hat versus the actor hat? Were you ever wearing them at the same time? What was that like for you?
So I kind of talked about this a month or two ago, not to do a shameless plug of the podcast I'm on right now, but I did
Where else are we going to do it? It's got to happen
true.
here.
It's as incestuous as it could possibly be. I did an episode on Sing Sing, which was the movie about the acting troupe in the maximum security prison. And I used that episode to kind of talk about my own life and how movies like Dead Poet Society have influenced what I do with my life and pursuing the arts. And part of that journey was taking a comedic acting class in grad school with Angela Pietropinto from Goodfellas. And I think that taught me, because I'd already been writing for many years when I took that class, and I think that class flipped me on my head and changed the way I write. Where previously I'd been trying to write a great story that I would enjoy. I kind of fetishized having the front row seat to whatever story I was writing. I think you do get a special sort of IMAX experience when you're creating a story.
Yeah.
Whether it is writing it or, other productions where I've done all the voices and narration myself, there is something really thrilling about being in that front row seat, having a vision in your brain, and alone, by wearing as many hats as possible, turning that into a reality. But taking a comedic acting class with someone who's so astonishingly talented and effortlessly just hysterical. I haven't been able to get this out of my mind for, 5 years now. This idea of writing lines that actors would be excited to say. And whether it's me saying them or me writing them for someone like Tristan, who I know can nail any punchline I write and find punchlines that I didn't even know were there, that has been my obsession. So trying with this project, I wanted to write for that. I wanted to write for me to try to be as funny as I try to be in conversation. I think when you're telling a story, that becomes the priority and the humor is second. But with this project, I wanted to chase that dragon. I wanted to be the kind of loose funny that the three of us are when we're just hanging out. And that meant putting the story on equal footing with the comedy. I don't know if the comedy is first, but finally having them on equal footing. So I tried to do all my homework before I got to recording with Tristan, so that when I was there, I was a director, because we just recorded his lines. And then after that, I recorded the Frank lines. So I did all of that very much later. I found the voice, which was difficult. It's a tough voice to do. You'll hear it if you listen to the audio drama. You can only do it for so many, 2 hours a day of just straight recording before you just blow out your voice, which also means you can't record the next day.
Sure.
So I had to pace that out and try to match what he did. So I think it was very much a response to what I had written and what he had already recorded. So those things helped me find a character who was out of my natural register and wheelhouse.
That's really interesting that you sort of found a lot of Frank after Tristan had recorded his portion. Let's talk about that recording situation. So I was there, but adjacently. So I'd love to hear it from y'all who were really on the ground with it. Tell me about this recording process, this single session that you did. Tristan, please set the scene.
Segue. I was in the middle of thinking that was the next thing that I wanted to talk about, because I feel like the listeners would be interested to know that, basically all of my lines were shot or recorded over the course of one day. And Cam and I got in here, and, I had the material for a little bit, so I had gone over it. But I still, before we started, I was still sort of searching for the voice. Because, like I said, a lot of the experience before was a certain type of character, a certain type of delivery. And while I had the experience, hitting different tones and notes with it, this was sort of a different animal for me. So I needed to workshop it with him for a little bit before we found it. And that probably took about half an hour just to get to some place that I felt comfortable and was like, okay, I can ride this for, the rest of the dialogue. And then once I did, we basically just rapid fired for 6 hours?
8?
8
I
hours.
think it was like 8 hours. Y'all were in that room for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was a while. And what we ended up doing was we would dry run one full time, and then we would go back, and I would figure out where the inflection points were, which dialogue needed the emotional weight, sort of what balance to strike with each word. And then in the second go, that was what we went live with. So it was really rapid fire. It was probably the most grueling day. It didn't feel like it, but afterwards you go, Jesus, I'm exhausted of recording that I've ever done. But it's also probably the most gratifying recording experience, because it really felt like, even though it's been quite a while since we sat down and got to be in person recording something at the same time, we've made a lot of mistakes, we've learned a lot of things, and so now whenever we press record, it feels like we're on, and you feel light on your feet, you feel like it's evolving and organic. But now you do it and then you clip it and then you know there's next to no mistakes in the lines that we actually recorded, which is kind of crazy. I would have expected there to be more of that as we went, but we've gotten down to a science pretty much at this point. And Cam, who does all of the editing, by the way, has gotten very good at all of the technical aspects of everything. So, you know, he's got the levels right. He's got us in the perfect situation to actually record something that sounds good as well.
Yeah. Well, and I know that the reason that this was recorded so in this way was because we don't live in the same city. And so we wanted to get as much done with you, Tristan, as we could. But so it was done by necessity. But did you like doing it that way? I mean, I know it was exhausting, but how did you find that, like, creatively and as an actor? Was that, like, fun and exciting, or was it like, I would never do that again?
It was fun. It's obviously, I wouldn't prefer to do it like that because, you know, by the end you do get exhausted and you wonder, okay, you know, if I had more time to think about this, would I approach this differently? But it was a lot of fun to do this project in that way because despite it being 8 hours, it really is of the size that accommodates that kind of a shotgun session. And you get to kind of capture the lightning in the bottle of the excitement of recording for the first time in a very long time, finding this new character, growing with it over the course of the day. And what I found is that I found the voice more as we continued recording, and so did the character. It sort of mirrored his journey. And so I thought that was a really unique aspect of recording this all at once, is that by the time he gains more confidence, I had gained more confidence in him as a character and his portrayal.
Oh, that's fabulous. Cam, what was this like for you? Because in these sessions with Tristan, you weren't doing your lines, or at least most of your lines you weren't doing. So you were more in this, like, director role. What was that like for you, and how is it different from other projects you've done together?
It's the first time I've really been in that position. And I think this sort of mirrors how we like to approach things. I think Tristan goes in fresh and captures something electric, and I need that rehearsal and prep time. And blending that, because I knew it was a big ask to, you know, drop into your house and say, I'm taking all the energy you have in your body for the next 8 hours, and we're going to knock out an entire audio drama or novel. And we didn't have to re-record anything for Tristan. I got everything I needed from that one session. That's incredible. Not a single line had to be re-recorded.
I was, like, convinced you were going to have to ask him to re-record at least one line somewhere because of, like, just because of, like, humanity, or, like, maybe Cam, later when you were doing a line from Frank, you thought, actually, no, it'd be better if Duncan sounded more like this, but you kept all of his original recordings.
And those are the differences, I think, that makes the combination for me so exciting, that makes that creative collaboration so fun. So much of the project is about duality and foils and the number two and echoes and all of these kind of mirror images, down to Frank and Duncan, down to me and Tristan. And I think even as Tristan, you were talking about finding the character, I think we both found that these characters have two sides to them. I think I mean, it's not a coincidence that they're both captains, but we developed this shorthand that I hadn't even found in the writing. I mean, I was 6 months into the project by the time I get there on the day to record with Tristan. And we developed this idea of each character having a captain voice. So there's a more, you know, Tristan as Duncan had a Duncan voice, which was close to his Tristan voice. But then sometimes when he needed to take control, when he was more confident, when he was the person he wanted to be, he would speak in the captain voice. And I think we both found those other shades of the character. It was tougher for me, I think, to jump back between the director role and the actor role. I like wearing the hats, but sometimes it's tough. And like I said, the Frank voice is tough to do. I mean, I did a voice a couple years ago where I was spitting blood after recording it for a day. This wasn't that bad, but this was close. This was as close as you can get without actually doing that. And I had a touchstone phrase, because Tristan was riffing on his normal voice, which I think is a more insidiously tricky thing to ask of an actor. I had the accent and the gruffness in the lower register, which is interesting to maintain, you know, doing that when the character's whispering. There are all these fun circumstances you have to figure out. But I had this touchstone of just Frank saying, "Shut up, Dunco," And I know exactly how he says that in his voice.
Mm-hmm.
So every time I would slightly lose it or need to like throw that hat back on, I would just chant that through the whole recording.
That's so funny. It's so funny because I was not in the room when y'all were doing this recording. We were at Tristan's house. I was hanging out with Alexandra, Tristan's fiance. But occasionally I would just hear a yell or a shriek from the other room. But it's cool I like being able to hear exactly what it was like inside, because it felt like such a personal, like, I don't know, private thing that was happening, like special thing that was happening. And
steam hissing out of the pressure cooker.
Yeah, exactly. It's cool to hear those inside bits.
Can I paint the picture a little more?
Sure.
Because I have all these memories just shooting through my mind right now. The first time we did this, which is almost 10 years ago now, the first projects and books we recorded.
That's wild.
That is wild.
If you remember, Tristan, it was you
almost
and
exactly 10 years ago now, actually.
I know, it's crazy. We're so fucking old. It was you and I huddled over my laptop with a shitty little microphone hanging
on the top of the laptop because we didn't have one with a bass.
And I mean, all sorts of noise. It sounded like shit.
It was in a dorm room.
I mean,
it was in a dorm room. We couldn't do anything with the AC. This would have been during summer, so the AC was so loud you had to turn it off to be able to record. And even then, we had these lights. The what is it? The ones that are like greenish.
What, fluorescent lights?
The fluorescent lights. There you go. In the dorm room, so like the sound floor in there is.
Yeah.
And then if we forgot to turn the AC off, then you'd hear the click on and click off. Oh God, it was just awful.
But we were excited. And I think that comes through in those recordings. I mean, I haven't listened to them in a while, but that's in the fucking vault for me. That's the Disney vault. But
for sure.
Going into this where we had real equipment, sidebar, I didn't use the studio mics that I have, the real like big ass setup.
Yeah.
We used these podcast mics that we're talking into right now.
It's handhelds, yeah.
Because we have now recorded, 400 and something episodes. And that means most of the time I've recorded anything has been with this handheld mic. And the studio mic, or even us over a laptop, is us both shooting at a stationary mic. So there's that feeling of like bellying up to the bar. And I think that makes it feel more actory, more performance-y, like, oh, I have to stand here and now do it, like Dance Monkey Dance. When you're holding the mic and you're trailing the cord, you can pace back and forth. You can move. I mean, the fucking noises I had to make for this book. The position, we'll get to that later, I'm sure. The positions I was in were just repugnant to just make my vocal cords do these things. You can't do that with like a professional broadcast studio setting.
Sure.
But about this duality, sorry, I know I lingered from the point there. I was trying to balance being a responsible director, where he needed some sort of direction or feedback. I needed to be able to answer those questions, and being an actor, because all of those shitty dorm room recordings was just us acting. Right. I would be absolutely on equal footing, where we would just be scrolling loudly with a mouse through the same Microsoft Word document. But this time, because the tone is so particular, there is a lot of drama in this story. There's a lot of character work. I needed to lead him in for a lot of lines. So I would be jumping between talking normally, doing narration, doing a Frank line. And for the last two chapters, which, as you can imagine, are the most loud and boisterous and explosive and have the most character revelations, I acted with him. So that was 6 hours into this marathon day where we're both like waning and dying. But that's good, because Frank's voice is supposed to be scraggly and fucked up.
I was going to say, are those the takes that are in the final version?
That's what I'm saying, because I recorded all of Frank after that day.
Right.
And all the narration. That day just got Duncan. But because I needed to layer in, we needed to be able to match each other's pace and tone for all of these moments I don't want to spoil, but I'm very excited for you to hear. I did all of Frank for Chapter 9 and Chapter 10. And I ended up using those takes. It was such a terrifying prospect because I had just recorded chapter 8 that day at home.
And what's it going to sound like if you after you found the voice for a second time?
Right, because it was like a month or two later.
Yes,
you know?
yeah, and it was like my voice is already broken in for the day.
Yeah.
I can probably match where Tristan was. And I listened to what I just had, you know, almost in the background. I wasn't thinking this was going to be the take and the final product. And I think that gave it a looseness and an authenticity. I think the exhaustion comes through in a good way. And yeah, I forced myself to not re-record it. And I used the Frank in chapter 9 and 10. And I think it captures some of that dorm magic. It doesn't sound like shit, but I think it has some of that piss and vinegar.
Right.
That is, I mean, that's still what I'm chasing. For me, that's still the mountaintop.
That's so nicely circular. I really like that.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting. You know, I know we're talking about Cam directing as sort of a new thing, but I don't think it's a new thing. It didn't feel like a new thing to me. I feel like you've always done that, like for me, whenever we've recorded, because most of the time what we've recorded has been what you've written. And, you know, I'll always bring something new to it. That's what's exciting for me. You know, you talk about your pinnacle. Well, my Mount Everest is being able to pull something new out of something that you've written. And you know, like you said, finding something that as an actor you're excited to read, that can also mean finding a way to say something that makes you excited to say that thing. It's two sides of the same coin. But I love doing that. I love getting something that you've written and seeing your reaction to how I've given life to something that you've interpreted and or something that you've written. And I feel like it's always been that, because if I take it in a different direction than you were intending, sometimes it's good, but sometimes you're like, okay, hey, you know, we need to pull it over here, and you've always done that. So this didn't feel like new to me in that regard. It was just more of an official capacity.
Yeah, that's so fun.
There were a couple moments, because, I mean, I said I was months into this by the time we started recording. So I'd been picturing this and imagining this and drawing this and sketching this and really trying to make this thing that was started as the seed of a little short story. I wanted it to be complete. Yeah. And there were some of those moments early on where you hit a couple of the early Duncan lines, and it was exactly what I was thinking of when I wrote it. I got to hear my idea. And yes, that's one thing when I'm doing all the voices and I can reproduce an idea, but it is so much more magical when someone else does. And then when you just kept blowing the roof off it by making all of these moments that I didn't even think were moments I was looking forward to. I mean, not to toot your horn too much, but when I was editing, which is the last stage of this Goliathan, when I was Goliath?
That's a new word you just invented.
I like Goliathan. That's Goliath.
I'm standing
and
by
Leviathan.
it.
Let's keep it.
I'm standing by it. By the,
You're a writer.
Short story.
Yeah, you're allowed to do this. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. I'm flustered for a reason, because when I was editing chapter 10, which should be the very end of this really long and tiring journey, I was putting together, I'm not spoiling it, but there are some Duncan scenes in chapter 10 that are, I think, the best stuff I've ever heard Tristan do. And I was absolutely blown away. So, yes, thank you very much for finding all this
Well, let's
stuff
not
that wasn't even
oversell it. And people are gonna hear you say that, and then what the fuck is he talking about?
there. They'll know.
Spoiler, I have heard these last chapters, and Cam, I know you were talking about, both of you are doing, I mean, throughout the whole book, you're both doing phenomenal jobs, but the last bit of this book is very special.
It's so dry. It's so funny.
Cam, you talked about this idea of duality earlier, and I want to talk about that here because I know that you did there was a lot of intentionality in your choices for doubling in this very Shakespearean way. You and Tristan played multiple roles. Your primary roles are, of course, Duncan and Frank, but you also double up and play some other roles. And I mean, there are lots of different roles in this book, and apart from the computer, who was played beautifully by me, everybody else is played by Cam and Tristan. So Cam, my question first is to you. Why did you assign the roles that you did without spoiling anything? And then Tristan, I want to hear what it was like playing these other roles, but Cam, you go first.
I don't know. Well, I can't answer. I mean, the doubling decisions are all story-based. I think... it's so hard not to spoil this. There are reasons why each character role is played by one of us that will become clear. But that was fun because it meant that every inflection and new voice kind of had to be tied to each other. You know, you had a North Pole and a South Pole, and now you had to find something else kind of in between. So those doubling decisions, I guess that's as much as I can say about that.
Well, and I assume you were drawing on like these like Shakespearean ideas. I mean, not that he invented the idea of doubling, but a lot of times when you see Shakespeare productions and adaptations, certain actors double and play certain people, and it has a like story impact, and it's not just about convenience and efficiency.
Yeah, I wanted that. These decisions were not made because I don't know other people or other actors. Do I need to talk about Faustus at this point? Do I need to talk about the two-handers, how much I love these things? But if I'm talking about duality and the number 2 and these two characters, obviously that's in there. So if you can play with more and more and more perspectives on that duality, to the point of Tristan plays a lot of these one-off cutaway characters that I think flesh out Duncan. And my central other character that I play is the narrator. And that was weird for me because in the initial version of the script that turned into the novel, that turned into the audio drama, I wanted us to alternate the narration for each chapter because a lot of the book is Duncan or Frank on their own. There are moments where they come together, but I as much enjoyed writing, and I think there's as much comedy and fun in the moments where they're alone. So initially I thought, well, maybe if it's a Frank chapter, then Tristan can do the narration. If it's Duncan, I can do it. But I think that was underselling the narration, because if you do it right, it should have its own voice.
Yep.
And it's written in my voice. So like treating the narration not just as a formality of pointing out who's talking, giving you stage direction of what's happening, but treating it as a character, like kind of doubled my workload. But then I got to treat some of these moments as monologues. The narration is aggressively stupid and doing some of that as almost in character silly monologues. I think that made me treat it with the respect it deserved instead of treating it as just an obligation.
And it's funny, we kind of stumbled into that. The narrator is also a character, you know, without actually being a character in the story. Whenever we first started doing this, I think one of the first times that we did it was in this silly set of stories that ended up being a lot of fun to write and record, about fruit and vegetables. And we had this narrator character, or it was started out as a narrator's voice, and then we were like, and we tried to record it sort of dry, and that didn't feel right for the silliness of the story. And so we were like, okay, let's make it a thing. And then he turned into this like snarky British guy, and we're like, how do we figure out how to incorporate him into the story? And so he becomes this worm that like lives inside one of the characters, and it's like it's just the most ridiculous thing. But from an early point in doing all of this stuff, we realized that you can get more out of a narrator role than just blankly and like dry like toast delivering and then the character went here, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a through line in all of your projects, Cam. Your narrators always have a really strong voice. Sometimes they have more of a like actual active role in the story, you know, more so than others, but your narrator character is always very strong, and I do admire that. Tristan, do you want to talk about how you approached these other like double and side characters that you played, again without spoiling anything, but how was preparing for those different than for Duncan?
So I always describe myself as a theater adjacent in high school. I wasn't super involved with the department, but I would act in plays as I had time. And, whenever we would do rehearsals and things, sometimes there's always icebreaker games, and sometimes you do games to sort of hone your different acting skills. And one of the things, if you've ever done a drama class from, 6th grade on, you've probably played the game called Freeze. And basically the premise there is the scene might open with two people, and they sort of improvise a specific scene, and then the two characters are going, and they'll get into it for about 30 seconds or a minute, and then all of a sudden the teacher or somebody else will say freeze, and then the next person up picks one of the two original actors to replace, And when they call freeze, you stay in the same position that you were in when the scene stopped. And so the new person replaces one of the two, and they sort of use the position that the remaining actor was left in to start a new scene, right, and go from there and keep going. That's what it felt like doing. It was sort of an exercise in finding an improvisational voice. Despite the fact that all of this stuff was written, it was like, think on your feet. How quickly can you figure out a voice that fits this role, which is a bit part, right? So you can be a little sillier in how you're portraying them. But again, for me, the challenge was I've always gravitated towards these, here we go again, that kind of gravelly voice, and I didn't want to do that because I wanted Cam to have that on this go around, so I wanted to challenge myself to try something else, and so it was just sort of what felt right in the moment. Who would be delivering this? What's interesting to hear that doesn't sound like my normal voice, and keeps your attention for the short amount of time that you're going to be hearing these sort of one-off characters.
Yeah, no, I will say for all of your parts, for both of you, I can always tell when it's one of you, probably because I know you both so well, but all of your characters are distinct, and I was never at any point confused about who was speaking or narrating or talking or giving information. I was really impressed with both of y'all's acting abilities with those, so that was really fun to hear.
They're good little exhaust pipes. I think they're kind of moments to like find a different sort of funny. And like Tristan said, you don't have to sustain the voice, so you can do something silly or just stupider. Like the golden rule is just what's funny and what's silly and what's stupid. And when it's two people, it's just making the other person laugh. So
right.
I like having those little moments, just breaking away from like character tension and doing stupid shit as an aside.
Well, speaking of doing stupid shit and silliness, Cam, we can't not talk about one of the other pivotal characters, or many of the other pivotal characters you play in this book. And I won't spoil anything, but there is a creature in this story called a problem. Cam, you played these creatures. Can you tell us about how you came up with these magnificent noises and walk us through what that was like?
So did you know all the problems were me?
Well, I mean, I knew you were going to play them before I heard them, but even when I hear them back, yes. But okay. I think that's because I'm married to you and known you for 12 years.
But that was the dream. That was the dream, to just unsettle you with one of the problem noises so you didn't recognize that it was me.
It is the most unlike you sound I've ever heard that's come out of your mouth.
Yeah, no, it's a possession. It's an exorcism. So I used to... There's this weird voice. I mean, we've enjoyed, the three of us, just doing stupid voices forever. But even before that, I would do a lot of stupid voices to unnerve my twin sister, who we on the show, we call Brother Samron. And there were a couple that really troubled her. And there was one, it was this like weird baby voice. And like I had to kind of roll my eyes back in my head and kind of peel up my butt. It's deranged to look at it. And I just loved the reaction that got out of her, because I could just let this like presence take over me and just kind of chase her through the house. So I wanted to, if I was going to do an alien story, I mean, this is a sci-fi story, and the problems are basically aliens. They're big green piles of shit. If I was going to make those the aliens, I wanted to make them as unnerving and disconcerting as possible. Like, not scary. Tristan and I can both do like big, boomy, scary voices.
Sure.
But to really trouble you, because like you were talking about with the narrator, this narrator is disdainful. And these two characters, the whole buddy cop thing that I think Tristan and I both like so much, it means that the characters don't like each other. So you need to keep giving them things to not like.
Yep.
And no one could
worse.
like the problem sounds. I mean, it's just... There was a lot of head shaking. There's kind of like a general vibration. I'm hunched over. It is an experiment. It's constantly just seeing... Because I would write these like despicable onomatopoeias in the script, just as like challenges for later me.
Sure.
Like, can you do a snarling gurgle? At some point it barks. And it barks at Tristan when it sees Duncan. And actually doing those, I mean, it was like a whole day of... You got to figure out what these fucking noises sound like, and making those problem noises. And without spoiling it, there are multiple kind of characters within this, but because the doubling is not accidental, There is a story reason I'm not telling you of why I did the problem noises. And that meant that as much as it was just silly and stupid and gross, which is definitely most of it, I was doing a bit of characterization there. This is hard without spoiling it.
Yeah,
but
sure.
there are small arcs you're accomplishing while you're squealing and snarling and these like disgusting sniffing noises. And I'm all over the microphone like... it's disgusting, but it's fun.
Yeah. Did you get to practice any of this with Tristan I know you were focusing on Duncan when y'all were recording, but did you have any sort of placeholders for when you guys were
Cam
recording?
was practicing those noises, and it's funny. The first time I heard them, I was like, "Oh, I recognize that," because Cam was practicing those noises back whenever you guys were still dating and in college, and we were all in the same dorm room.
Oh, okay. Sure.
When back then, whenever you're just trying to say the most absurd thing to make someone spit out their drink or whatever. Those sounds were honed to perfection back then. So he was just tapping into something that had always been there.
Okay, I see. Well, that makes sense. There's always been a problem inside of you, is what you're saying.
The outtakes are
Cam is the
feral.
problem.
The outtakes are despicable.
I want to hear those. Maybe that can be a little bonus treat.
It would just be 30 seconds of the worst things you've ever heard come out of a human
Do you
being.
still have the files?
Oh, they're all there, yeah.
Oh, I'll have to hold on to those. I'll play them at your funeral.
Easter eggs.
Maybe that's what I'll do. Amazing. Well, this has been so much fun. I've loved getting to hear y'all talk about this experience. It was such a cool thing that y'all have done. I can't wait for the listeners to hear and read the book. The book is available as an audio drama. That's what we focused on today. But it is, of course, also adapted in a novel form if you want, a hard copy that way. I recommend both because they are different and distinct and fun. But I especially recommend the audio drama because of Tristan and Cam's amazing acting work, plus my amazing acting work as the computer. I can't let that go.
Shameless plug.
I had a lot of fun. Again, Cam, you're a great director. You helped me a lot. Oddly enough, a computer voice requires a lot of direction, and Cam did that very well.
You did a wonderful job.
Thank you very much.
I'm very glad you were in there. And you and Tristan kind of got to shit talk each other a little bit, which
Yeah, it was fun.
reminded me of the pod.
It's true. Yeah, as passing ships, right? Amazing. Well, thank you both very much. I can't wait for everybody to hear and listen to and read the book. Thank you so much for supporting the show. And we'll be back in just a few days with another more normal, brand new episode.